What's up? Welcome to episode 2 of Running Forward. I'm your host, TJ Dailey, and I'm here again with these guys, Trent and Todd, my brothers, and we are back from Boston. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Boston experience, some of the adversity we faced, and we've got some segments at the end that are going to tie this all together. So as you know, we talked about it a ton last week, and it's been talked about around quite a bit. The three of us went to Boston to run a race, and it almost didn't happen. I'm not going to tell you the story. I'm going to step back and let these guys tell you what exactly happened and why we need to plan better next time. So I'm going to kick it to Trent and let him talk about the morning of the race.
It was an interesting morning. I know, 2 weeks out, Todd was sending the weather reports to everybody, and it's going to rain, and I'm Mr. Optimistic. So no, it's not going to rain. It's going to be fine. The weather changes there so often, and it got closer, and it was the night before, and there was really no way around it. So 20 mile per hour headwinds, rain all day, weather was between 35 and 40. So the morning of the race, me and TJ got up, Todd kind of took his own way in, and we headed over to the buses, got an athlete's village, which is quite a treat. It's a field, right? And it's got a tent on it. By the time we got there, it was, I don't know, maybe
ankle deep?
Yeah, ankle deep in mud. So you had to get off the walk, and we frantically were searching for Todd as well, which we'll probably tell that story a little bit later. Thought me and TJ were gonna have to run this one without him, but it was pretty miserable. You know, we had sweats on, we had ponchos on, your feet were frozen pretty much the time you got in there. So you had to go to use the restroom, your feet were muddy and frozen. So we had frozen feet, hands were cold, trying to get ready, and that's kind of, you stood there, we were there probably an hour and a half, and that's how it led up to the race. So not only are you thinking about the next 3 or 4 hours in the race, you're kind of like, what am I doing? You know, your feet are frozen, your hands are frozen. It was a pretty miserable experience.
Yeah, I would say adverse, to say the least. So, that was our perspective, coming in from the city, getting there about 10 o'clock, not really running till 11:20. Todd was staying with his sister and brother-in-law about halfway to the race in Natick, and took another route and got dropped off at a shuttle. So I'd be interested to hear your perspective on the stress that you faced trying to find us and what almost didn't happen.
Yeah, so I show up maybe 10 o'clock and there are 20,000 people in Athletes Village, and I have no idea where Trent and TJ are. And of course, we've been dreaming of this, right, for years, so we're gonna run this race together. And there's no way to find these guys. I mean, when they mentioned the ankle deep mud and people sloshing around, nothing, looking, nothing. And so I finally head to the start line, looking for these guys, and I get to the start line, and I am at the top of a hill right before the start line for probably 25 to 30 minutes. Thousands of people pouring by me, and I'm just scanning, nothing. And I'm thinking, all this stuff just runs through your head. There's so much buildup, there's so much emotion. TJ had said, "Oh, not a problem, we'll find each other, no big deal." And I'm walking down the hill, and it's really thinning out. At this point, a dozen people are walking past me every 30 seconds. And, I'm prepared to go up and stand at the start line and wait or have to start the race myself. And I hear, "Nerve!" And there's Trent walking up the hill. They were the last people out of Athletes Village because they were waiting for me. So it was a cool moment, when we ran into each other. There's, I think, some loyalty there we all take pride in. I don't think any one of us is going to cross that start line without the others. So that was a neat story.
Yeah, very interesting logistically for me, facing your fears, facing adversity. I'm a planner, and as these guys will tell you, I am to the minute where I say I'm going to be every time. And the race for our wave started at 11:15. And so Trent and I are just, logistically speaking, it's a half-mile walk, give or take, from Athletes Village to the starting line. So Trent and I left the village at 11:10, and I am freaking out. No reason to, really, because it wasn't like, they're going to shut the start line down, but I wanted to be there in our corral at 11:15 and 11:15 and 11:18 and 11:20. And yeah, we finally found him. So it was good to get the race started.
Mind you, they had shut down the corrals because of the weather, right? Typically you start in corrals, but because of the rain and the thunderstorms coming in late, they had taken all the corral signs down, so that definitely didn't help.
Well, it made for an interesting race. I think all of us collectively felt like we were running without toes. Like it felt like you're running on your fist or on stumps because our entire feet were numb, and I think it all came around for us. So that was adverse. It was nasty. I mean,
for me, it was the headwind. I mean, running straight into the headwind. So if you know Boston, you start out 26 miles outside of the city and you run in to the east, and the wind was coming straight out of the east, 25 miles an hour, 30, 40 mile an hour gusts. It's one thing, every step was soaking wet, but you'd get those gusts of wind. That was tough for me personally.
And it took 3 or 4 miles, like TJ said, your feet were frozen. So you didn't even feel, it was almost like ski boots. You're just running, and then it took about 3 or 4 miles in, the blood gets flowing, the temperature starts to be less of an issue. Hands are still frozen. There was no way to keep your hands. I mean, we searched for mittens and spent 2 days trying to find the right attire. People had sacks over their shoes, and we brought extra socks to change, but it made no sense to change extra socks with the shoes. So I would say the hour and a half we were waiting was probably the most challenging, just because you just knew kind of what was coming. And then the occasional whiteouts, probably 8 to 10 times throughout the race. The complete downpour where you couldn't see, 5 feet in front of you. So it made for a good story.
I think it was really cool how everybody, us and all of our people that were racing with us, took those negative things and made them a positive. One of the things that, because we waited in Athletes Village so long, we started at the very back. There's 30,000 people running this race, and we're dead last. Well, a lot of people run this race for charity, for really good causes, and they don't necessarily have the most refined training plan, so they maybe plan on running it a little bit slower, enjoying it a little bit more. So we had to run and weave through people for 3.5 hours. Yeah. It was nonstop the whole way. And, a lot of times you get into those mindsets where it's like, I'm having to run. We ended up running an extra half mile, 3/4 of a mile because of that. I'm having to run so much extra. It's going to affect my time. It's going to, or when the rain was driving down, oh man, this is terrible. I hate running into this headwind. But what I thought was cool was the reaction, our reaction, people were running with, and the crowd when it would downpour. Mm-hmm. Like, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And people, bring it on, yeah, let's go. And the people out there that were spectating were so engaged. I don't know about you guys. Yeah,
no, I would say that's probably the more interesting thing. For us out there running, you're moving, it wasn't as bad, but man, the fans to come out there in that type of weather, of course I've never run Boston before, so I don't have a comparison, but it was crazy. It was like no other marathon I've ever been in. I mean, the high fives, the yelling, the screaming. When you would go over and give them fives, they would go crazy. Or when it would rain harder and you would yell and they would yell louder. I mean, it was there were several times throughout the race where that definitely picked me up when I was hitting a wall.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I found myself wondering who was crazier, us that are out there running 26 miles or the fans that didn't have to run that were out there. Like the Wellesley girls in particular, right? Mile 12, just out there screaming their heads off nonstop. You could hear them from half mile away. Notable point in the race. But I mean, you're talking about a day where half of the invited field dropped. So you're talking the people that, the elites, right? The people that get paid to come and show up and run these races. More than half of them didn't show and or dropped out, part of the way through the race, which, gives you a little bit of hint of the conditions.
So I think that's a great lead, and it's a great transition onto how this race set itself up to cater to particular elite athletes. And I think that's where we could talk about adversity, and we can talk about the catch-22 of being elite. The great thing about being an elite athlete is you're catered to. You've got the best coaches in the world, you've got the best facilities in the world, the best equipment in the world, but at the same time, if you're not careful, I think there's a bigger life lesson here. If you're not careful, there's a catch-22 and you get accustomed to having that. And what you saw in this race is that the elite of the elite, typically the people who had track backgrounds, your 5K, your 10K, your Olympians that had been doing it at that level and been that successful for that long were the ones that dropped. Mm-hmm. And the people like Des Linden or like Yuki, who maybe train in more adverse and haven't been that elite at that top pinnacle elite level for that long. It catered to them, and they were able to succeed and kind of drive through that. So I'd like to maybe explore a little bit more that whole idea of staying humble, making sure you're putting yourself in adverse conditions to condition yourself to perform when stuff's not necessarily, when situations aren't perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and even maybe not even so far as putting yourself through adverse conditions intentionally, but appreciating. I think sometimes when you go through adverse conditions, and I think this expands much broader than running, right? I think to life in general. You never know when your moment's going to come, right? You continue to grind it out, and that was the interesting thing for Des, right? So Desi wins the Boston Marathon. Her whole career, she's kind of been second, third place. Never really got it. And if you listen to the interview, she wasn't sure her moment was ever going to come, but she grinded it out. Continued to, you mentioned training in Michigan and some of the adverse mental conditions that allowed her to stick it out despite wanting to drop at a couple of points during the race, right? And then hits her moment when she is 17 minutes off her PR. So another interesting fact, right? She wins the Boston Marathon running 17 minutes slower than she did in 2013,
11, one of those two.
Yeah, so that to me stuck out, very impressive. Trent, I don't know.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, it was definitely a grind. So I think all of us out there, from just a personal standpoint, hit a wall. The adverse conditions played a part, but it was a grind. It was a grind for all of us. And I think in life, there's always something to learn. There's always something to learn, and most of the time we grow and learn in an adverse situation. So I've found when times are tough and things don't go your way and you have to kind of grind through, those are the times where you learn. If you're successful all the time, you're always winning, and those are fun moments, but those aren't the moments where I think we grow as humans.
It's a great point too, and I think we grow to appreciate some of the other stuff even more, right? As your bar gets reset, your expectations get reset, your norm gets reset to some of the struggles and the challenges. It drives that much more of an appreciation. You hear a lot of, just in stories or in life stories of people who had come from such adverse backgrounds, such difficult upbringings, right? And they were able to parlay that into huge success because I think mentally that prepared them. And so I think some of the examples that we saw in Boston, those conditions, I think expand much more broadly.
I think staying humble, staying grounded, and really, I think you said it, appreciating the process and appreciating the journey. I heard a great quote from one of the Kenyan runners. It has been a while, but it was, every time you cross the finish line is a start to a new journey. It's a start to a new race. And appreciating, what you have to go through. I know personally I fail at times, and this is back to running a little bit, but you want those great performances in life. When I go out for a training run, and I'm sure you guys do the same, I'll set it up sometimes, so that I'm downwind, downhill when I know I've got to run something fast, and that makes me feel good. Again, it's a catch-22. It makes me feel good that I accomplished something, but then on the flip side, I'm not necessarily doing myself any favors by setting it up so that I win every time, and I think that carries out into a lot of other areas in life. I'd be interested to see if you guys had any angles from a professional standpoint, situations that you can think of where taking the road less traveled or taking the more difficult path parlayed into something great.
I could relate a little bit. On the back of my jersey, it said "Run Third." I was joking with these guys because I was chasing their butts all day, so they probably thought that meant run third out of us three. They're like, "Oh, there's the third guy coming. Hopefully he's the last." But really, the run third was a spin-off of the I am third, which is putting God first, others second, and then ourselves third, which is really countercultural because we're in a society where it's always self first. We're always told to put ourselves first, and it's all about us and our successes. And something I think we've all focused along in the journey is reflecting on all the people that help us get there. We obviously helped each other in that journey, but the spouses definitely played a role, the kids and the sacrifices. So part of that being humble is just putting others before you, being grateful and thankful. But the I am third mentality is something that I definitely focus on at work, at home, in my personal life, and Run Third was another iteration of that. So,
yeah, I would say for me professionally, I think just staying and continuing to grind and staying humble, I think has been reinforced in a couple of different patterns for me. coming out of college, for example, I came into the workforce. I was ready to conquer the world. I was ready to be promoted and get to this level and next level. And in fact, that was actually the slowest part of my career. When I stopped thinking about that and stopped focusing on that and instead focused on what I was doing, that's when my career took off. So for me, that really does resonate. When you're putting your energy in the right places, I think you tend to see more results. I think a lot of times people put in their energy in things that they can't control, right? And that can be more costly than I think people understand.
I think we talked about, last week we talked about breaking barriers, right? We talked about Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. And Desi broke a barrier. First American woman in 33 years to win the Boston Marathon. And what she said and what she's paid a testament to, and if you look over social media, the thing that pops up more often than not is just show up. Eventually, and I think that's back to the professional piece of this, eventually the right situation is going to crystallize if you keep your head down and you work towards it. Had that been perfect weather conditions, she'd have gotten destroyed because there were people in that field that were considerably more just naturally gifted. Like you said, she's always kind of been second, third. Who are we to talk, right? She's an Olympic level athlete and she's been in the last 2 Olympic marathons, so she's a phenomenal, but there were people, Mary Keitany, there were other people in that race. Actually, she was in London, excuse me. But there were other people in that race that were really, really fit and would have destroyed her. So, I think it.
One thing I would add on to that, I hadn't even thought about until right now is Shalane and the barrier she broke in New York, right?
Yeah,
so she was the first female American to win in quite some time at New York. Maybe even greater time, but you look at that in the context of now what Desi's done, right? We talked about when Roger Bannister broke that, how many people right after that broke that. So it's interesting mentally, I don't know that it was a conscious thought of Desi's, Shalane, an American woman can actually win these, and this was, right, conscious thought, but that was interesting as well.
So, go ahead, anything? No. So, I think that we've talked about the female winner. And we've talked about breaking barriers, but we want to keep it light too. We want to do a segment that kind of talks about the fun part of it. Yuki Kawauchi is unusual to say the least, just in everything he does. The guy has run 79 marathons faster than 2:20. He's got the world record for number of marathons run under whatever time it is. I think anything faster than between 2:08 and 2:20, he's run like 79 2:20 marathons or better. He's run 50 some 2:13s or better, 40 some. Like, it's insane. Boston was his 4th marathon this year. He has a full-time job. He works for the government. He doesn't have a sponsor, which is insane to think of. He's a national hero in Japan now, so he'll probably get a Mizuno sponsorship or something like that. That makes sense in that particular regard. But the he's crazy. He's run a half marathon in was it 1:06 in a full suit?
Yeah, that was hilarious to me. That was my favorite part because you guys know I kind of toyed with doing Where's Waldo for the Boston if it wasn't crazy. But, it goes back to a little bit, Trent, what you said about not taking yourself too seriously, I guess, right? And I'd love to hear that story, people that keep it fun, right? And they're not just out there to compete and win and beat everyone else. And but he's hilarious.
I got another one for you. So, and another fun fact, Rob Pope, 39 years old from Liverpool, actually set a Guinness World Record himself. He ran the fastest marathon by a male dressed up in full costume. He dressed up as Forrest Gump, and he ran in like 2 hours and 36 minutes. He goes out, he's trying to be Forrest Gump. He's done 15,000 miles in like 400 days, and he went out to the London Marathon in full get up and ran at 2:36, and that's an official world record. So
let me get this straight. Let me figure that. So he spent a year and a half. He was like a veterinarian or something was his day job.
He still is a vet, I think.
So he's a vet, and he spent a year and a half running 15,000 miles, running the actual route that they talked about in the Forrest Gump movie, and then he shows up at London and runs a 2:36.
Yeah.
So we're not going to belabor this experience too much, but there's a couple key points, I think, key situations throughout this course that are worth calling out. So, I want to kind of start and talk about each one of these sections. I'll let you start with kind of the beginning of it and how we felt and what the beginning of it lends itself to and what you have to be careful of.
Yeah, once we got over the conditions, which I think we've talked about plenty, first several miles are downhill. So the tendency is you're pumped, you're excited, it's Boston Marathon, and you go out flying down these hills, right? And you completely kill yourself. So, I think those first few miles, you obviously pacing us, I think we're really thoughtful about making sure we conserved energy. We didn't go out too hard, too fast. So that was a huge part, I would say, that those first few miles.
We did have to make a stop in those first few miles.
We did. A little too much Gatorade to start the race.
We fell in line with Shalane and took a pee break for a good 30 seconds. That was an interesting turn. So after the beginning, it kind of levels out. There's opportunities to take advantage of a little bit of downhill there still. There's a little bit of climb, but nothing crazy. After you pass halfway, you work your way 16, 17, 18 miles into the Newton Hills. Trent, why don't you talk a little bit about that? I remember at 18, you looked over to me and you said, I'm blitzed, which was scary because at that point we were real close to missing our goal time. How did you feel? How did you get through the hills?
First of all, we had a goal time prior to weather conditions, but if any of you guys know TJ, he has one level and he just always is going all out. So he was determined that we were going to hit this. I thought we were hot early. We run into that area and I'm like, okay, 18 miles and legs and lungs. I'm trying to conserve and make sure I'm not overworking myself. Just kind of felt like I'd put too much out there. I was kind of nervous, and we always talk about the hills to do even effort, so keep the effort the same if it means slowing down. I wasn't keeping track of how much time we really banked. It was kind of like turn my watch off and just try to chase TJ. So that philosophy worked. For me, I kind of went to the well and some prayer for a while to really kind of get me through the next 6 to 8 miles, and that and some of the distractions from the weather really worked. So the hills were, I think there was 3 big ones. The first couple, not so much. The last one kind of I think we went up a little hot on the last one. Me and Todd were running together at that time. And, when I say running together, TJ may have been 5 feet ahead of us. It wasn't like he was, a mile ahead of us. So, different times we were trying to get that pace and we were able to get to the top there. And then we saw the Heartbreak Hill was over. And I remember TJ saying, okay, we have 5 miles left. And as long as we don't, lose any time, we got this. And then I just kept thinking that over in my head. We're going to break 3:30, we can do it. And we actually picked up a minute in the last 4 or 5 miles. Yeah. And I'll let maybe TJ share about, we come down through the tunnel and come out to Boylston Street, and wow.
What's that? What street you turn right on again?
Hereford, right on Hereford, left on Boylston.
And he would know this, spending so much time in Boston. So yeah, I think I was super inspired. And there's a lot of things that led to that. When I looked at Trent at 18, we had banked, Todd and I were, I was yelling out splits and he was figuring them, and we had banked about 90 seconds. Typically what you'll hear when people run marathons is do not bank time. Go out slow and negative split it. Do not set yourself up for failure and say, I'm going to run the first half so fast that no matter how slow I run the second half, I won't fall off. Well, we had banked about 90 seconds, and I was, I was trying to figure out where Trent was mentally, because is he really blitzed or is he playing it smart? And it turns out he was playing it smart. So we had banked 90 seconds. Well, after we got through the hills, we were down to 20.
Can I translate for a second? Because I asked TJ what he thought, and he basically looked at me and said he thought Trent was sandbagging at about 18, which was absolutely hilarious. Sorry, I had to throw that in there.
Unbelievable. Unreal.
So we had 23 seconds, and over 5 miles or 5 miles or whatever we had left, that's nothing. Typically, and anybody who's run a race like this knows, if you've lost that much time that late, you're done. There's no chance. But we bombed down that hill. We picked up 30 seconds that first mile coming down out of there. And then, again, that was where everybody was turning this adversity into positivity when the rain, because I think 2 or 3 times the rain came down. And all I could think of is when we were kids, out in the driveway with tennis rackets, and there's pictures of it. I think we were 6, 10, and 12 or whatever it was. The rain's just pouring down, and we're screaming, and we're running by, and of course anybody that's out there, it's high fives. So we get it, we come down, and we're deciding how are we going to cross the line. And Trent and I had a conversation.
I got to tell this part of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in church, TJ, ever since we've been little kids, for those of you that are Catholic, the Our Father, where you hold hands with everybody and you get to the end of the Our Father and then you raise them up for the last part. Well, TJ, ever since we were kids, would try to take your hand and put it above your head in the middle of church. So this was his thing, and we were talking about it in Athletes Village. It was like, we're gonna Our Father this thing on the way in, aren't we? So he, it goes back to him just always trying to embarrass you to some extent.
So we come down, hands joined, we figured it out. He's going nuts. I mean, high kicks, yeah, just, screaming. Trent's holding it down, keeping pace with us.
Praying.
Yeah, the best picture ever. Take a look at this. I mean, you want to talk about a perfect capture of what we went through. This picture is phenomenal. We get there, and having run it the year before, I made the mistake of missing everybody. They were both there to watch me, and I saw you halfway, but I didn't see anybody at the finish line because I was so focused. And it's extraordinarily difficult your first time in a race to pay attention to anything else because you want to make sure you go the right way and finish right. So we're coming down, and hands in the air. And I know you guys are focused, and I look right, and our parents, and it had to be spectacular for them, are standing. You got them tickets to the grandstand. They're standing in this grandstand, and I just look at them, and they're in tears. Kind of give them the nod that we know they're there, and then we finished. And I don't think there's any regrets with that race.
No, that was something I'll never forget.
Thanks again for joining us. Appreciate you guys being here. Do this again next week. See you then.
Looking forward to it.